So as we've discussed on this channel before, President Biden has stated his intention to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th, and recently he's moved that date up to August 31st. Now, while this isn't really a full withdrawal, as he's still leaving hundreds of non-combat troops there, former President George W. Bush, the guy who started the war, is not happy about the withdrawal, saying that Afghan women and girls will, quote, suffer unspeakable harm as a result of the withdrawal. And he says, I think, hold on a second, I gotta do his voice. I think it is, yeah, because I think the consequences are going to be unbelievably bad. Yeah, well, first things first, I don't think he really has any say in caring about women's rights, given how he's spoken positively, just like all of our presidents in recent years, of Saudi Arabia, and is quoted as saying, "I told the Crown Prince how much I appreciate his vision for a peaceful and integrated Middle East, and how I appreciated his leadership in helping rally the Arab world toward that vision. I also appreciated the Crown Prince's assurance that Saudi Arabia condemns terror." Yeah, and if Charles Manson came up to me and said he condemns murder, I would not believe him. But this is George W. Bush we're talking about. What the hell did I expect? So, but going beyond that, the fact that George W. Bush is allowed to give his opinion on this topic and is still welcomed in media circles as a serious figure and somebody who is worthy of being respected speaks to a larger problem: the rehabilitation of monsters and war criminals such as George W. Bush. It's not just that he was a horrendous president, although he certainly was. It's also that he is a war criminal. He did the Iraq War, he did torture, he did the Patriot Act, which completely obliterated your Fourth Amendment protection from unreasonable search and seizure, but establishment liberals are trying to pretend that it never happened. In fact, as the American Prospect points out, when pointing out his rehabilitation, they point out how his paintings of wounded warriors or wounded veterans are prominently on display at a prominent art gallery in Washington, D.C. What they don't tell you is why those wounded veterans were sent there to be wounded in the first place, because of the wars Bush launched that were based on lies. In May of 2020, Bush released a short video calling for hope and unity in the midst of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. In response to this, several establishment Democrats praised him for the video, including Katie Hill, a former congresswoman from California. Quote, "In a million years, I never thought I'd be crying watching this, thinking how much better we'd all feel if Bush were president today. WTF." The only WTF I have, the only reaction that is WTF for me is, WTF would you say that? And thankfully, most people in the replies seem to agree with me. You don't have to prop up a monster like George W. Bush in order to put down another monster like Donald Trump. But Katie Hill is not an anomaly, not even close. As recently as less than 4 years ago, a majority of Democratic voters held a favorable view of George W. Bush. And this goes to show how the rehabilitation of him has worked and has been working, and how Trump has broken a lot of people's brains. More recently, this past April, he did an interview with CBS Sunday Morning where he called on Congress to tone down the, quote, harsh rhetoric on immigration. My boy, you created ICE. I think the immigrants would rather have harsh rhetoric than human rights abuses and horrific detention centers that you set up. So don't even give me that. And, you also see people like Obama, who ran against the Iraq War when he ran for president, saying at least Bush had a basic regard for the rule of law. If he did, then why was he convicted in a Malaysian tribunal court of several war crimes, including torture? This is who you view as somebody having a basic regard for rule of law. And this issue has spread not just to George W. Bush, but also people like John McCain, who passed away 3 years ago. You even have people on the left in Congress, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, praising him. And you have Arizona Democrats, just shortly before his death, viewing him favorable more so than Republicans. He was, quote, a great friend of Saudi Arabia. Again, I just explained why they're horrendous. I didn't even mention the genocide they're committing in Yemen. And nowadays, he's propped up just as a hero to spite Trump. And, you can almost guarantee that when we have the next Republican president, which is at this point is either going to be Trump again or Ron DeSantis, God help us all, they're going to prop up Trump himself. They're going to say, hey, at least Trump had the decency to fill in the blank. And that speaks to the greater problem here. I shouldn't have to explain why George W. Bush was a horrendous president. I shouldn't have to explain why we shouldn't try to prop him up as at least he's not as bad as the other guy. Because if we keep doing that, then what we're eventually saying is we're willing to lower the bar so low that why even bother trying to do good when, at this point, the bare minimum is mass war crimes. The rehabilitation of George W. Bush speaks to a broader problem in American politics and goes to show how tribalistic it has become in recent years. Because if we continue to prop up war criminals and monsters, people who should be behind bars and should never see the light of day again, then it's never going to stop, and nobody will ever be determined to do better. George W. Bush was a monster, and still is, and he will never face justice for his crimes. And we really should stop rehabilitating him, because that not only does it set a bad precedent for the future, it minimizes the suffering that he caused and is still ongoing to this day, and that is unacceptable. Don't rehabilitate George W.